Okay, so we want to look at, as we are all teachers of English language, we want to look at ways of improving our students' performance in the English language through creative pedagogical skills. Just a moment, I want to clear my screen so that I can have the full operation. Okay. So what is our objective for this session? Most of the things we're going to discuss, I believe we have foreknowledge about some of them. So by the end of the presentation, what we're going to do is to add to what we already know. That is creative ways of teaching the subject we teach. That is to add to the knowledge of creative pedagogical skills in teaching English language. Specifically, what we will be looking at. So by the end of the session, you should be able to explain the concept of pedagogy, then identify the place of the subject which we teach, the language we teach, its place in the world and in academia. Then we also have knowledge of peculiar challenges facing students in the study of English language. Then we also discuss the challenges that teachers of English language face. Then we now delve much deeper into creative ways of improving the teaching and learning of English language in our classrooms. So basically, this is what we're doing, discussing actually over the session. It promises to be very interactive. So I'll be asking questions and I'll be expecting responses from you, my participants. So first of all, I want to look at understand the concept of pedagogy. So I ask, my first question, what is pedagogy? Quickly, views can be shared in the chat for us to look at. What is pedagogy? Any idea or view there? Any view on what is pedagogy? I believe we have all heard the term before. So we want to see your views in the chat box. So the first one comes from Chair Francis. It is the science and art of teaching. Doreen says it is the art of or profession of teaching. Solomon says it's the method of teaching, the method of teaching. That is very encouraging. So as our colleagues have rightly said, the basic understanding of pedagogy is the art of teaching, the art of teaching. What that means is that it describes all the strategies that we use to make teaching and learning effective, such that at the end, all the educational goals that are set for a lesson or for a school or for the subject we teach will be achieved. Now, our second question comes. We said it is an art of teaching. Why do you think it is an art? Why do you think teaching is an art? So once again, I will expect some views from the chat box. You said it is an art. So someone says the kind of method we use in teaching, the activities of educating. That's from Dominic. Why do you think it is an art? So while we hold on to that one, okay, so an answer is it's an art because it requires skills. That's excellent, because it involves creativity. Thank you. They use different kinds of methods for teaching. That's from Monica. Then Fushabli says it involves skills. That is excellent. So now here comes a scenario for us to ponder. Imagine someone who has absolutely no training or skills in teaching, being given a class to teach for the first time. A novice put in a class to teach for the first time. What are some of the likely things this person may do that you will consider a blunder or not in conformity to the best classroom practices? Let's share our views in the chat box. What are some of the things that this novice will do that you will consider a blunder, waiting for your responses in the chat box. And always someone who has no idea, no training about teaching, put in a class to teach. What are some of the likely things the person might do that in your view will be considered a blunder? So Abdul Kudu says, talking to the board, teaching to the board in the class is from Doreen. Okay. Accepting chorus answers. That's from Isaac Watten. That's interesting responses. Then will not review student previous knowledge, challenge the classroom management. The person can only use lecture method, challenge with classroom method. So a lot of responses. That's very encouraging. So basically, as we have all said, this is a summary of some of the things the person is likely to produce. This week, I had the opportunity of supervising some students who are on internship. And I observed some of these things that we have already mentioned. So one blunder you may see with such a novice is standing at one location of the class. So hooked to one position of the class from the beginning till the end of the lesson. It's one blunder you are likely to see. Then using the same voice in terms of pitch. If it is high, using the high pitch throughout the lesson. So there is no voice modulation. Then the person might not pay attention to students' reactions. So as someone suggested, he might resort to the use of lecture method. So he's memorized things and he's pouring it to the students and not paying attention to how the students are responding to the lesson. It's one thing that might come up. Then not engaging the students in the discussion. So these are some of the possible things that a novice, someone who has no skill, formal skill or training in teaching, is likely to produce. Now, based on these observations, what are some assumptions that we can make? One, it means that being a good teacher requires more than just the knowledge of the content. So you don't say, I have first class in linguistics, so any aspect of linguistics I can teach. No, you require more than that. Yes. Then we can also have the assumption that certain skills must be acquired and perfected to make teaching and learning effective. So without these skills, you may have the knowledge, but how to impact it to students becomes a problem or a challenge. Then we can also infer that vigorous effort must be put into lesson preparation, delivery, as well as evaluation. And these are the things that make English, the teaching, or the act of teaching an art. Now, our second objective, what is the place of English across the globe? We are teaching English language to students, irrespective of where we are. What place does English language hold across the globe? So, few statistics from the Council of Association of Linguistics. 20% of the world's population speak English as their native language or as their second language or as a foreign language. So there are three categories in which you can put the English language. Some, it's their native language. Others, it's a second language that they learn and use for different purposes. And others learn it as a foreign language. Now, in addition to its status as a mother tongue in many countries, the global use of English language is growing for communication among speakers of other languages in places where English is not the majority. So apart from it being a native language, globally, other countries use it for different purposes, and one of them is communication. Now, it will interest you to know that the non-native speakers are 950 million as at 2022, while the native speakers are just a half of that, which is 430 million. So in actual fact, the native speakers are lower in terms of numbers than the non-native speakers. And that is the nature or the scope of English across the globe. Now, what is its status? So as I have already indicated, it's a dominant language. So these countries here, the United States, UK, Canada, Australia, and others, they use it as their native language. Then in other countries, it is used as an official language. So that's the second category of people. Talk of India, the Philippines, Singapore, and some other countries that are in Africa. If you delve deeper into it, you realize that many of the countries that were colonized by the British have adopted English language as the official language. So they form a second category. Then there is this idea has been put into a concentric circles of English that was developed by Kachu since 1985. It stood the test of time, even though there's been some scholars who have disputed his views. However, these are the three categories into which the speakers of English language have been put. So we have the inner circle, the outer circle, and then the expanding circle. For those of us who did delve deeper into language, the study of language, we would have met Kachu all across our lessons and sessions. So the inner circle is made up of countries that use English as their native language, while the outer circle countries are those that use it as their official language. Then the expanding circle, they learn it not as the official language, but another language that they use. Basically, it's for communication, business, interactions, and all that. But for the outer circle, they use it in all the official platforms, talk of education, the law, religion, and many of the areas. Now, we want to come into our field, which is academia. What is the place of English language in academia? Now, English, having established itself as an international language, is used in several fields, and academia is no exception. Now, let's brainstorm over this. In which areas of academia is English used in your country? So if we have, apart from Ghanaians on the platform, if there are other people from other countries, we would like you to share with us, in the field of academia, in which areas do we use English language? Waiting for your views in the next 60 seconds in the chat box. What are some of the areas within academia that we use English language? So Akambori says for instruction, someone says for in the law, social media, then at all school levels. Okay, that's another view that's coming from Doreen. Then in schools, okay, commerce has come, then teaching and research. All these are wonderful responses. Okay. Now, I'll put this into the chart. So as some of our colleagues have said, in Ghana, in the situation of Ghana, and across many of the countries, the outer circle countries, English is used as a medium of instruction and assessment. So it's what we use in teaching, and it's what we use in evaluating both our own teaching and that of our students. Then in academia, we build upon our portfolio, we build ourselves professionally through research and publishing. And in all these spheres within academia, English is the medium that is often used. So in Ghana, we research and we publish in English. Rarely do we have people publishing in the local languages. That's obviously maybe because we do, as in Ghana, we do not have a local language as our official language, as we have in India and other countries which have Hindi as their one of the official languages aside English. Then when it comes to academic progression, we need English language. And anytime I talk about this academic progression and the role of English language in it, sometimes I have indifferent feelings. Is it good or is it bad? Such that students have to pass English language at all costs. before they are able to progress in academia in Ghana. Maybe as we move forward, we have to ponder this, and in our own small way, see whether we can find a way around it. Because you have a student who has passed AAA in many of the electives and then has English B and is denied access to the university to read a particular course just because the person is not able to get A in English. All these are challenging issues that as scholars in the area of academia, we have to delve into. Now, I want you to share with us a few things. What are some of the challenges that you have identified with the teaching and learning of English in your school or your country? It could be either on the part of students or on the part of teachers. What are some of the challenges you have observed with the teaching and learning of English language, either on the part of students or on the part of teachers? If you can share our views in the chat box within the next 60 minutes. So someone already is in with large classroom sizes, very true. Native language interference, that is very true. Because we have our native languages, then students are afraid of making mistakes. Perfectly true, the use of L1, as someone said. Some teachers don't have command over the subject. Then students' readiness to study English is low. Very true. Learners L1 illiteracy. So challenge with the L1 having impact on the L2. That is true. Student inability, a lot of answers coming in. No training opportunities for teachers. Some students have no or little interest in it. Then they have no discipline, actually. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful responses from our colleagues out there. Yes. Now, I've summarized some of these things, which we have already said. So the influence of the mother tongue is one major thing that we have a challenge with. So obviously, some of the issues you have is students trying to translate their mother tongue into the English. So you have the transliteration going all over. Then we also have prejudice or misconceptions about English. So I believe we are all aware that there are bound some misconceptions that students have about English. English is difficult. English is somebody's language. Why should we kill ourselves over it? If I'm not able to speak English, it doesn't matter. Then some also tie it with colonization. So it's a colonial thing on us. We should abandon it and go away. All these are some prejudices and misconceptions that exist. Then the attitude and methodologies of teachers are some of the challenges that the students also find. Teachers and their attitude or the methodologies that they use. Then the students also, some of them, as somebody mentioned, lack confidence in the speaking of the English language. Now, on the part of the teachers, as some of us have said, the attitude and perception of students towards the learning of the English is a problem. Yes, so we have students using L1. You ask them to speak because fluency comes with your ability to practice what you have learned. They wouldn't. Then in some jurisdictions, you have prescribed books, text or novels when it comes to the literature aspect that students have to read, they wouldn't buy them. What can the teacher do? Then we have the influence of the L1 or the mother tongue in pronunciations and sentence construction. So it's a challenge that we teachers do face. For those of us who have delved deeper into the language, you will hear of the variant forms of the English language. So you have our native tongue having impact on the way we pronounce certain words. So the students also tend to pick up some of these things. Then the unavailability or limited number of teaching and learning resources and technologies is also a challenge that exists. In our world, in our area, realize that you go to some schools, even reading materials are not available. It's only the teachers' material. That is why we are looking at how can we find ways of making our teaching very effective. Then somebody also mentioned this earlier, handling extremely large classes. Then being handicapped in certain aspects of the English language due to specialization. Yes, so basically in our various universities, you either major in language or literature. There are other universities where you study all of them so that if you go to the field, irrespective of where you find yourself, you could handle any of them. But for those who go straight, I'm doing language, I want nothing literature. I'm doing literature, I want nothing language. You get to the field, we have enough language teachers, so what must you do? Handle literature. Then we'll be found wanting. So these are some of the challenges that we have. Then we also have a situation where improvised teachers are used in handling English. And I put improvising in inverted commas because I'm talking of a situation where we have no language teacher of English language. So we ask the person who has studied social studies to handle the subject. Someone is going to study French. Oh, it's all language. It's all language. They have the same thing. So let this person handle it. All these are some challenges that teachers are facing. Now, what are some of the ways by which we can make the teaching and learning of English interesting for our students? So first of all, for students to develop the love for the study of English, we must devise ways of making English lessons fun and interesting. By this, we must act as facilitators. That is, we only facilitate the teaching and learning process, the pedagogical process, by providing learners with conducive and enabling environment for language learning. So it's not always the case that you have to stand in front of the students and be speaking and talking and all that. No, give them materials, provide them with the environment, let them explore, and they'll be able to learn on their own. Now, to do this, it calls for a concerted effort at blending various approaches, skills, and methodologies in your pedagogical process. And these are a few of the things that we want to look at. First is for you to know your students, knowing your students. And what do I mean by knowing your students? Always you have to critically observe and gather data on your students' interest. Know which learning approach they prefer. Which learning activities do they enjoy most? If you're able to gather this data, it will inform how you go about your pedagogical process, your teaching. And that makes you a great teacher. Then, keep records of students' challenges and progress. So, there were times where we used to fill cumulative records. I stopped teaching at the basic levels for some time now. I don't know whether we still have those records, but there were good avenues where we could know students' improvements and challenges, so we could build upon them. So at any level where we are teaching, we should keep records of students' challenges and then their progress. Then we must always create a congenial atmosphere for the student to feel free in expressing their views. Why will students run into hiding when the teacher of English is entering the class? It means you are not creating a congenial atmosphere for them. Some of them feel irritated just at your presence. It means there is a problem. So always you have to know your students and know what they like, what they do not like. Then you also have to gain the trust of the students so that they can confide in you about their challenges. If students cannot walk to you and tell you, say, this thing you taught today, I didn't understand this part. Or say, I read this somewhere. You also taught us this. How do I understand both? Or how do they relate? If your students are not able to come to you freely, then teacher, you need to take a second look at your teaching methodologies. Then you must come to the level of the students to be able to understand them. Some time ago, we had a webinar on how to have empathy and how to sympathize with the children, sharing their joy and their pain. That's why we said gain their trust. When they have challenges at home and they bring it to class, you as a teacher should be the person they can confide in. And if you open up their mind, understand them, sharing their problem, this is a teacher who understands me, who loves me. I will love the subject that he teaches. Now, Jerome Bruner came up with another skill that we need to acquire as teachers, and that is scaffolding. And what do we mean by scaffolding? So it's just like a ladder. The teacher begins introducing the lesson. So the teacher serves as a model at the initial stages, then guides the learners. Then at a point, the teacher allows the students room to operate while he monitors. So gradually release them. Then at a point, there is an independent work that is done by the teacher. So a scaffold is basically a ladder, more of a substance, that a tool that we place by structures when we are erecting them. When the structure is not strong, we use the scaffold. But when the structure is strong and can stand on its own, we remove our scaffold. So as teachers, we need to learn the skill of scaffolding. That is, beginning each of our lessons by introducing the concept to the students. Then we guide them along. Then gradually we release them. Then when we understand, realize that they've got the concept, we leave them on their own to explore and come up with their own challenges going forward. And how can we do this? These are a few of the skills that we need to acquire. First one, I want to talk about is chunking. Chunking basically is breaking down of the task or the objectives to be achieved in a lesson. So you are teaching at the basic school and you have, let's say, 60 minutes. You load students with the meaning of a verb, forms of verbs, which is lexical and auxiliary. Then you jump into or try to treat regular verb and all within 60 minutes. Say, hold a break. You are giving students a lot of overload. That is, you are giving them more than they can absorb. And that is what we call cognitive overload. So we need to always chunk or break our lessons into basic units so that we avoid cognitive overload. Then, as a good teacher, one skill you need to acquire is your ability to scan the classroom. At every point, you should be able to identify your students wherever they are seated, observe their activities, know what they are doing at what particular time. In a twist, when you turn to the board, what happens behind you? You should be able to gather information about everything that the students are doing at every particular time. That is why it will be a bad practice to be talking to the board. How will you know who is listening, who is not listening? Then we also have, to my left, pausing for effects. So as a good teacher, one skill you need to acquire is the use of pauses. You want to introduce your lesson by reviewing your RPK. Ask a question, pause to know how the students have responded to the question. Have they understood? You now point or call out the students to give an answer. It is always good to use pauses in your lessons so that you wouldn't be speeding along your lesson delivery. Then we also have differentiation instruction. Differentiation instruction. It is actually a task that is difficult to attain. However, we can do that. So what does it mean? Differentiation instruction. You have various levels of students in your classroom. You have the below average, you have the average, and you have the above average. Sometimes you have exceptional children in your class. How do you go about your instruction so that you do not leave any of these category of students out? That's where the differentiation comes in. So as you might have learned in our various assessment lessons, even in your questions, the questions you ask, there should be a question for the below average. There should be a question for the average. There should be a question for the exceptional. Now, one way you can do this effectively is to write your task. If you can print them, that is very good. Print them, have a specific question for each student, if you can. But taking Ghana, a situation where you are teaching a class of, say, 60, how can you do it? So possibly what we do is have know the various categories of students you have in your class. Know those who are below average, those who are average, and those who are above average. Then put your task in such a way that you have those who are working a task that is for their level, like below average. Then the average group, give them a task. So at the end of the day, you are going to achieve the same objective, but the students having different tasks to accomplish. Then using appropriate questioning techniques, that is another skill that we need to acquire. Don't always stick to one way of asking questions. No, sometimes vary the way you ask your questions. Yes, this week I observed students asking, who can tell me? So after the lesson, and then when I went to whole discussion, I'm like, anytime you say who can, the students will sit idle because none of them can. So such ways of questioning shouldn't be used. Then we also need to be innovative in our ways of teaching. And what does innovation mean? Thinking critically and creating new ideas that will enhance your teaching for the ultimate benefit of your students. That's what it means to be innovative. It means as language teachers, we need to create the ideal classroom which has creative works and technologies that stimulates students' learning. So anywhere within your classroom, students can, there should be something to learn. I know it's a difficult task for us, but if we want students to perform well in the language we teach, then we need to create this ideal classroom situation where we have a lot of creative works and we use technologies in our teaching. How do you do that? First, devote time for online resources. The internet abounds with a lot of information. There are a lot of empirical studies on what works best for students in many areas. So there will be a lot of research works. Read on some of these things, go for online resources, and identify which ones can just support the level of your students, whether at the basic level, at the senior high school level, or at the tertiary level. Now, how do we create such ideal classroom setting? It's a bit difficult, but I will show just a few of some of the classroom settings that we will describe as ideal. Imagine your below class 3, class 2, class 1, kindergarten, classroom spread like this. I believe students will always love to run to your class. Even when they're playing on the floor, they are learning alphabets. When they turn around, there is something to read. Beyond that, this can be another ideal classroom situation where you have pictures, images, things on punctuation, words for the day, and a lot of other things scattered around. Now, if you do not have these technologies in your class, you can use student creative works in your own classroom, just like we have. Now make it part of our lessons interesting. Now, this is more of an advanced level where we have a classroom with technology all over. And when you are teaching in such an environment, when students have materials and things to interact with, it makes teaching and learning very effective. Now, someone's issue is, please, what you are saying, can it happen, really happen in our situation or in our part of the world? Yes, that's where the idea of improvisation comes in. Improvisation is, I need this, I need a watch. I do not have a watch. What do I do? Get a similitude of the watch. That is what improvisation means. So you create the ideal situation through your own ingenuity. I need this, I do not have it. I have to find a way to create one for myself. So you can design and use cardboards or manila cards for illustrative purposes. So you can have word or flashcards, sentence cards, scrambles, and what have you. You can also organize pictures and images from newspapers, magazines, and journals. And these are called infographics. And post them in your classroom, or you have an album. Let students create an album, an exercise book dedicated as an album, in which they will take information from newspapers, magazines, and journals and post them in it. They bring that to class to aid your discussions. Then sometimes when you do not have these and you can have the real objects, please bring them to class, so long as they do not cause injury to your students as well as yourself. So for instance, you want to teach about sounds made by animals. You said, okay, let me organize earlier. So you start bringing the cat, the dog, my brother, my sister, students to jump through the window and leave you in the class. So we need to be circumspect in respect of these things, really. Then another way we can improve the performance of our students is to celebrate student success. When students do well, celebrate their success. How do you do this? It's a means of valuing the children's work and serving as an incentive. So one way of doing this is to publish their writing. You ask students to create poems. They brought their poems. Why don't you pick a few of them that are so excellent and place them on the school's notice board? Why didn't you post them in the class for a week or two? The students will, whoa, I did a great work. They walk around, their heads high. They are looking for another way of coming up with something creative again. So it's always good to celebrate our students by publishing their writing works. You can also keep a class album, as I already indicated, of their creative works. So students write a story and you realize this is a nice story. What I do in my case is I type these stories out and I print them and paste it in the student, either in their class or on the notice board. And student with their names under it, students walk around and they feel worthy that yes, I wrote this. They become very proud. Why won't others emulate same? And that is how you are increasing improving the performance of your students. Then, when you do all these, the essence is that you want to motivate the students. You want to stimulate competition among the students. Then you're also advised to use language learning technologies. We are in a modern era where technology has taken over the world. As teachers of English, we need to buy into it. So what do? We use language learning technologies in our various classrooms. What are some of these technologies? They could be electronic media platforms that will enhance effective teaching and learning. Ideally, English language should be learned in a language lab, which is provided with all the required instruments such as speakers, microphones, headsets, machines, and all that. But when you do not have that, what must you do? Create the enabling environment through the use of the technologies that we have. Many schools now have projectors. Others have smart boards. You have mobile phone, radio, TV, computers, and so many others. These are technologies you can use in your classroom. So think of the desktop computers, these tablets, and the smart boards. All these can be used in our various classrooms. And in using them, first you must decide on the appropriateness of the technology or the media that you want to use. So you do not just jump into taking any material at all into your classroom. You must know its appropriateness for your students before you use them. Then, as the teacher, you must prepare and rehearse with the technology prior to the lesson. So you have a day to your lesson. Then 30 minutes to time. You are now struggling to put together your technology that you want to use. You wouldn't be a good teacher by that. Then you can select short videos on specific topics to be treated. So you're a teacher, you're going to teach, let's say literature, you're going to teach a particular poem. Let's take African Tender Storm. The poem that the students are reading at the senior high school level for now. You could select a short video about a tender storm. Let the student watch the video, ask them questions on it, link it to what you are going to teach. That's how to be a creative or a good teacher. So that's the example I've just cited. Then you can talk of The Road Not Taken by Frost. That is a poem where you can easily get either a picture of a crossroad, show to the students, call out for their responses. What is this? What does it bring on your mind when you get to a point like this? You're already delving into your lesson and you're making it easier for them. The same applies to the teaching of literary elements such as ironing, flashback, suspense, all the literary elements that we have, the figures of speech. Some of them, you can easily get videos to show the students. Take, for instance, a flashback. You can show a short video where an action happened earlier and it's recapped. Think of suspense, monologue, a character standing talking to the audience alone on stage. You can simply show that even in the text. Then you can do that. You can also use videos depicting a topic to be discussed in a comprehension lesson. So there's a topic to be a lesson on comprehension. It talks about a particular subject matter, let's say flooding or earthquake. You can simply get a video of the recent situation that happened in Turkey. Let the student watch, and there your lesson begins. You're making it easy. When we use this technology, what are advantages? It engages the students in the process because you are showing them things, asking them questions on it. They are doing much of the talking. You talk less. The students. Then it creates that paradigm shift in the process. So when you project your question, exam questions, you want to test the student's ability in terms of, let's say, speaking test. Show the thing in a flash on the board. Let it go. Ask the student to write it. You are assessing them, but there's a paradigm shift from the normal writing on the board to another assessment process. Then it also enhances effective collaborative learning among the students. Not only that, it reduces or lower the learning anxiety level of the students. Students do not need to imagine things because you show it to them live. So when we use technologies, it reduces anxiety. There are a lot of language games that we can use in our classroom. So you want to teach English, you want students to perform in it. Use language games that will involve the students in your lesson. How do you do that? Do a survey online. Look for various games from different sources and use these in your lesson. Of course, they should be appropriate to the level that you teach. Then alternate them. Don't always use one game. Alternate them to avoid monotony and boredom. If you are not careful, students will give you names based on your approach of teaching. The teacher that always uses this method is the one coming. I hope we do not want our students to call us by the names of the methods we use in teaching. So let's use language games to vary what we teach. Then games can also be used to teach vocabulary, registers, literary elements, or figures of speech, and what have you. All these things, we can use language games to teach them. So I happened to have a session in a school some years ago, and we're discussing something in literature where they were to identify figures of speech that were used. And here you have a board race. So students are given sheets with statements on them, and as a group, they are to identify the figures of speech that are used in it. It's actually a speed race. So which group finishes first gets the reward. And here you have the students fully participating. This is the completed work that you have. You can also adopt same. Then word jumbo game. So you are teaching spelling. You can use the word jumbo game to spice up your lesson. There are a few sources of language games here. Time will not permit me to go through all of them. But if you go to Icebreaker Ideas, you have one. If you go to Edutopia, you have few of these. Making English fun, you have a few of these. Fluent2 is a very common platform where you get a lot of language games. TEFL2, you get a lot of language games there. Then Raj Classroom 2 is another one. Triply is another source. Then Mass Translation 2 is another source of language translation. A lot of them abound, which you can use in your lesson. Then as a teacher who wants to make students perform well, you also need to use role plays and demonstrations. So it's not always the case that the teacher has to do the talking, the teaching. As I already said, we only facilitate the process. So engage students in the process such that the teacher only acts as a facilitator. Let the students take roles in the class, act them and play out. Then, why do we need to use that? Because it's effective for teaching comprehension passages, which are narratives. So you are teaching a narrative. Let students put them into groups. Let them write a narrative and come and act it out. Literature lessons on drama and prose works on decision making, conflict resolution, many other topics. You could use role plays to do that. So you are discussing a particular subject matter in literature. Let the students come out and act out some of the portions of the text they are reading. Then while doing that, provide them with appropriate language resources for them to demonstrate how structures or sentences are formed in terms of subject, verb, agreement, and what have you. Then another thing we need to do as teachers is to prioritize students' interest. The student's interest must always come first. If we want our teaching and learning process to be very effective, to improve the student's performance in English, you have to take into account the interest of your student when planning your lesson, not during the lesson. So when planning your lesson, know the areas of interest of your students. Use their interest as a framework for your teaching. In other words, the areas you need to cover in the curriculum. Look for the interest of the students and let that guide how you teach the content you are supposed to teach. Now, when you base your instruction on their interest, you will be engaged in the lesson and they'll be motivated. And the passion that they have will carry them places. Then you also need to conduct classroom experiments. Experiment here does not mean we are going to the Science Resource Center, put together one or two materials and see the results. No, we are discussing English. So how do we conduct classroom experiments? Let students explore their environment about things that they learn in class. So there is a concept that is learned in class. Let students go back home into their immediate environment and gather a lot of information. Let them explore about what they have learned. Ask them the following day. That is one way of conducting the experiment. Subject them to what has been learned, determine the appropriateness or otherwise. So they go out to pick information. They are sitting in the taxi, they are listening to what people say, certain expressions. Let them bring to class, discuss with them. So this, is it right? How could the person have said it in the other way that would be right? Let them gather information from newspaper articles, newspaper headlines. Some of them can be very ambiguous. Let them bring those statements to class. Discuss with them, expressions made by people around them, and the use of certain words in certain contexts. Doing all this is an experiment that you are conducting as a language teacher. Then motivate the students to create their own poems based on discussions held and discuss their work. So this is to those of us who are in the literature. You want to teach a poem. Students have the concept. Let them create one on their own and bring to class. By doing, when they bring it to class, you discuss with them. And that is how you conduct experiment. Ask the students to create their own expressions to fit into figures of speech learned in class. So this is also for the literature gurus. You have taught figures of speech. Let them go out there, create their own expressions, bring to class for discussion. All that. Then same applies to sentences and other stuff. Another thing we need to do as a teacher is to establish classroom connections. And what do we mean by classroom connections? More often, hardly do teachers use group work. So how do we establish connection in a classroom? Fostering connections between students is one of the easiest ways, among our students. How do you do this? You can help create a supportive environment, classroom environment, by making sure to carve out time in your lesson plans for students to work in groups and collaborative learning. By that, you pair the student up with different classmates, give them a common goal. We are all driving towards this objective. By the end of the session, you come forward, present to us. Now, as they pursue the objectives of the lesson and achieve them, they develop mutual understanding and encouragement, and they support one another. That's how we create a good classroom connection. Now, when you do this, It will create a safe place for students to put their English skills into use in a supportive environment that encourages creativity. So when they work in groups, they create the connection among themselves. Then, even in your absence, they'll be discussing issues among themselves. And that is how they establish connections with your students. So this is a sample of a situation where the students are vigorously looking at expressions, a group work. Then here is another scenario where you have students paired based on their various abilities and groups. So some of the groups have 2, others have 4, others have 3. So group work establishes connection between the students. Then you should also alternate the learning environment. As the teacher of language, English language to be specific, do not always teach your English in the classroom. What are some of the things you can do? Change the learning environment to another one that is favorable. So occasionally you could move outside the classroom because it stimulates the brain and helps the kids to stay more active. So for the first time, for those of us who have been practicing it, sometimes you see the joy with which the students move out. Some of them will run out of the class. Hey, we are going for a discussion outside. It helps to improve their communication skills. Then, while there too, you engage them in team work, and it will develop their ability to tackle or face the real life situation, because sometimes they feel like they are in their environment. That is when they are outside the classroom. Then if you are this, for instance, you are a language teacher and you are discussing a comprehension passage about nature. Why do you stay in the classroom? Nature is our immediate environment. Move outside the classroom to a suitable immediate environment that depicts the form of nature you want to depict. If you do not have it, then obviously you can use the technology as you have earlier discussed to find one of that. So these are some examples of the environments where we can carry our students. These are students having a reading comprehension outside the classroom. Then here we have a group of children too, in a very nice and serene environment, seated on stools made from wood. They show the impact of nature and the environment around them. Then this is an adult class, tertiary level class, which is also being handled outside. So it's not restricted to only the lower levels, even at the tertiary level, at the senior high school level, whichever level we find ourselves as teachers, we could use that. Another thing that we ought to do is vary our assessment techniques. If we want to be considered an effective teacher, if you want students to achieve the best, vary your assessment techniques. Instead of always writing on the board, sometimes project, sometimes read, let students write. That is how you vary. Then sometimes you make audiovisual presentation of your lesson and test. So for those of us who are in schools where we are fortunate to have these audiovisual materials, it is an avenue for us to use it. Instead of always writing on the board, you have a passage to discuss, project it to the students. You have a poem to analyze with the students. I once taught in one of the schools in a remote area. Luckily, they had this projector. I never held a literature class in the classroom. It was always at the lab, ICT lab. So some of my colleagues were like, why do you teach literature? Should we teach it in the ICT lab? I had to explain to them that it's not only ICT that can be taught at the lab. So let's make use of the visual presentations of our lessons. And in assessing the students to let's do same. You can project your test and your lesson as well. Then sometimes assess your students in groups. Give them a group activity and assess them on the group activity. It's not always the case that you have to be individual assessments. No, sometimes give students projects to be done over a period of time. So you give them a project to do about a week or two. Then you assess their work. Take them and assess them. Not always, I'm coming to conduct a class test. Sometimes we don't even make the students aware. That's not being fair to my colleague teacher. let's give them varying forms of assessments over a period, not a one-time sit down test and that ends it. No. Then blend formative and summative assessment. So that's just what I said. Formative within the lesson, almost every lesson, with every period within the lesson, you're assessing your students. After each lesson, have something that you have assessed, write that. The next lesson, you do that. Then you have a summative one, also at the end of the semester. Then another thing we also need to do as good teachers of English language is to reflect our own teaching experiences. Assess yourself, how you teach in a classroom. So creative teaching doesn't stop at coming up with new ideas. It's about encouraging new ways of thinking, coming out with unique ideas and student-driven learning. And one of the best ways to do that is to encourage reflective teaching. So when you, after the day's teaching, you're back, reflect over what you have taught. Were you able to achieve your objectives? What could you have done better? How will you do it better the next time? Reflective thinking. That is one thing we need to do. Then reflect on how you are doing in the classroom and what can help you take ownership of your teaching and identify areas for improvement. So I just explained that. Basically, what have we been looking at? As teachers, we are to act as facilitators of the art of teaching and learning. So we said pedagogy is the art of teaching. Now that act requires that we act as facilitators, provide learners with materials and help them to formulate their own learning. Then we've also learned that we can help in immeasurable ways to solve students' language learning challenges by being creative and innovative. And this calls for knowing and understanding our students as much as we can. So that's the first thing. You should know your students, know the understanding level, then it will guide what you teach, how you teach it. We've also learned that we are to adopt pedagogical skills that are suitable for our students' level of development. So I've mentioned a lot of skills that we require. You need to see which of them is suitable for your students. We've talked about a lot of technologies. Know which ones are suitable for your students. Use that to spice up your teaching and learning process. Then we also need to create an enabling environment to consolidate the language learning. You might not have the luxury of the desired or the ideal classroom. My dear teacher, create one. And we have discussed how to create one. Find innovative ways of making your English language classroom a fun and an interesting place for students to learn. Then let learning be centered around the students through the use of technology, language games, and other improvised resources that we have discussed. Then you also need to rotate your learning environment as and when necessary. So the weather is threatening to rain. You want to read about the weather, so you want to take all the students into the rain. Parents with jab or your throat, please don't do that. Know when it is appropriate to take the students out of the normal classroom. Then apply varieties of assessment techniques in your lesson assessment. Then always reflect your teaching experiences as well. We always need to remember that we as teachers, we make big dreams come into a reality. So let's gather a few things we have learned today, implement them in our lessons, and together we'll make great nation, great people out of the students we teach today. I believe after today's lesson discussion, let me say, there are things that we'll do differently. Thank you for the audience, the involvement, and the participation.
Thank you, Sir Prosper. That was an amazing presentation. A very good presentation from Sir Prosper, the Deputy Administrative Director of IELTS Academy. Wow, so here we go. Are there participants? Do we have questions? Do we have any question from our participants? Would like to read them out. Kindly use the chat box. And may I remind our participants that the attendance and evaluation form has been shared in the chat box, both on YouTube and then on Zoom. So please do well to fill out the attendance and evaluation form for your certificates. It will be closed after the session. So if you are on YouTube, check the live chat box. You see the attendance and evaluation form. If you're on Zoom, kindly check the chat box. You will see the attendance and evaluation form. Thank you. So let me stop sharing and then take our questions. Thank you. Okay, Madam Esther, your hand is up.
Thank you very much. This is very insightful. I have two questions. The first one has to do with the definition of pedagogy. We saw that the art of teaching. So I'd like to know if it applies to only children, adults, or both adults and children. And the second one is that he mentioned grouping students and giving them questions according to their ability. I'd like to know if the grouping should be done obviously for people to see that they are being put in certain groups because of their ability, or we have to find a way of covering up. Thank you.
All right, so Sir Prosper, that was a question from Madam Prosper.
I don't know whether we have some time to spare. I would have loved some of our participants to share their views on the questions before I come in. Because good teachers, okay, when students ask questions, we ask the views of our students.
All right, that's fine.
So anybody that could, and then share their views on the question. Her first one was on the meaning of pedagogy, whether it applies to only adults, the skills that we are talking about, whether it applies to only adults or all levels. Then I think the second one was about the ability grouping. Should it be done for students to obviously know that I'm not good, that's why I've been put here? Or how do you go about it? Those were her questions. Just one or two people to share their views, then I come in.
Okay, so are there participants? Please use the chat box. Please use the chat box if you want to. Okay, this is from Amankwa Ebenezer. It says, I think it would be better to mix them up so the good one can assist the weak one. Yeah, so while we are trying to answer the question, Madam Esther, could you please type in the chat box so that the other participants who didn't hear the question can also answer by using the chat box?
Okay, so because of time, because there might be other.
Okay, we have some hands. Let me go to Sir Nicholas. Okay, before that, Madam Maybe says, I think the pedagogy can be used for both adults and younger ones. Okay, so Sir Nicholas, please unmute yourself.
Okay, please, thank you. My question is, when you are asking a question to a student, are you supposed to mention the student's name first before you ask the question?
All right, thank you. So Madam Esther has typed a question in the chat box. She says, does the definition of pedagogy apply to only children or all learners? So there is a question on the floor. If you are going to comment, let it be about the question. If you have any different question, you can use the chat box and we'll attend to you later. Thank you.
Okay, so on the first question, the definition of pedagogy, the art of teaching cuts across all divides. So we are not only talking about English language pedagogy, but basically what we have brought on board is some of the skills that are peculiar to language. the teaching of English language. However, when we talk of the art of teaching, you realize that many of the skills that we have discussed this afternoon does not only pertain to younger students, it's cut across both basic, even kindergarten, basic, the basic level, the junior high, the senior high, so to the tertiary level. So it's not restricted to the teaching of adults only. Then, regarding the grouping of the students, I mentioned it in this way. I brought it in terms of assessment when I said differentiation instruction. So when you are giving students tasks to accomplish and you put them into groups, you may want to put them not based on their abilities. That is why it's good to know your students. Know the ones which are above average. If you put them together in a group, obviously they will finish the task quickly and they'll be making noise. So know their abilities, spread the abilities across. Those that you find very weak, and realize that they are the ones that are vocal, they are always talking in class, they want to feel like teaching their colleagues, spread them over the groups so that they can help you even in helping the weaker ones. That is why for some scholars, they have a challenge with schools where students are grouped into classes based on their abilities. So you have students who are in class A, regarded as the excellent students. You have those who are in B, who are a bit average, and you have those who are not academically good, all of them chunked in one class. So you have a situation where even teachers are asked to go to those classes and say, for this class, anytime I'm going there, it is something else, I have headache. It is, for me, it is not the best of practices. My school, for instance, we have that situation where we have a class designated as brilliant class. But you go around the classes and you have some students who are brilliant than those in the brilliant class. And those there feel relaxed because they think they are the brilliant students. So you have others doing well somewhere. So we need to be circumspect regarding the groupings. Then a colleague asked about asking of questions, whether the question you call a student and direct a question at the student. That is not a good practice. It is not a good practice. The moment you call out the students, the rest of the students will feel that they are not part of the question that is coming. So ask the question. While you're asking, all of them are listening. They wouldn't know which of them will be called. So they are all listening and reflecting on what answer to produce. That's the best practice. Ask the question, pause for them to think and reflect, and call a student to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. We have this question from Philip Allah. He is on YouTube. He says, how can a teacher utilize differentiating instructions without making the below average or average students feel inferior? Should I repeat the question? How can a teacher utilize differentiating instruction without making the below average or average students feel inferior?
Oh, okay. So I don't know whether we answered that question while I was answering this one. You do not want a student to feel inferior, weak. So I'm the one who is down. I know nothing. So I'm always in this group. No. We should rotate the students. Never put one category of students into one group. Have mixed abilities in the group. And that is what will make it effective.
Okay. Yeah, so we have this comment from Reprimates. Heterogeneous grouping is the ideal one. You don't put the weak ones in a group. Yes.
Okay, so one colleague, Amankwa Beneza, is of the view that we put them in the same group for assignment. So I don't know whether he's talking about one category of students. Let's take the average students. We put all of them in one group. The fear is that the below average wouldn't perform. They'll be scoring zero. Pardon me. They'll be scoring 0 or lower mark. So if care is not taken, they will take that to be their level. We are the group that always scores below low marks. It's not the best. That's why I'm of the view that we should mix them. Thank you.
Thank you. I can't see any other question in the chat box. So before we get to the closing remarks, let me go to Dr. Neil. We have with us Dr. Neil Arvalo Alcantara, the president of IELTA International. May I go to Dr. Neil for his take on today's session? Hello, Dr. Neil.
Hello, Ebenezer. Good morning from Peru. Well, thank you to our speaker, Prosper Dogby, for sharing his relevant experience with us. We are so happy because we have learned a lot, how to be creative in our classes. And also it's very important to develop these skills in our students because they need to face a lot of problems in life, and they need to know how to resolve them quickly and effectively. So thank you so much. Thank you, IELTA Ghana. Thank you, Ebenezer, and thank you to all the participants of this webinar.
Thank you, Dr. Neil. So that was Dr. Neil Arvalo Alcantara, the president of IELTA International. Thank you for coming. All right, we also have with us Mr. Alfred Kwetu, the academic director of IELTA Ghana. Let me go to him for his submission on today's session. Hello, Mr. Alfred. All right, so I'm sure Mr. Alfred is going to be with us later, but before that, let's see whether we have a question in the chat box. Okay, we have none. Oh, okay, so we don't have any question. What we have in the chat box is compliments, very insightful and helpful presentation. Kudos to the speaker. Blending the old methods of teaching with technology should be encouraged. Okay, great presentation here. Interesting presentation, good lesson, and so many positive feedback from our dear participants. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. We are so grateful to have all of you here. We have participants from all over the place, from Peru, from Pakistan, from Kenya, from Malaysia, Ghana, and so many countries with us. All right. Permit me to share my screen even as we are near the end of the session. All right, so thank you all for coming. We are so grateful to have you with us in our today's session, 12 International Webinar. of the International English Language Teachers Association, Ghana, on the topic Improving Students' Performance in English Through Creative Pedagogical Skills, led by Sir Prosper Jogbe, the Deputy Administrative Director of IELTS Ghana. May I remind you that the evaluation form has been posted in the chat box on YouTube and then also on Zoom. Do want to fill in the form for your certificate. Thank you. All right, so before we go, we have the certificate of recognition going to Sir Prosper Jogbe for his invaluable service rendered as the resource speaker of the webinar entitled Improving Students' Performance in English Through Creative Pedagogical Skills, awarded this 11th day of March 2023 via Zoom. And this certificate is signed by Dr. Neil Aribalo Alcantara, the President of IELTS International, Dr. Glenn Parila Cortizano, the Academic Director of IELTS International, Ms. Fati Isipo, the President of IELTS Ghana, Mr. Jacob Maisop Kando, the Vice President of IELTS Ghana, Mr. Alfred Kwetu, the Academic Director of IELTS Ghana, and yours truly, Ebenezer. Thank you. We have one other certificate of appreciation going to Ms. Doreen Delagado in recognition of her invaluable service rendered as event facilitator during the webinar entitled Improving Students' Performance in English Through Creative Pedagogical Skills. It was awarded this 11th day of March 2023 via Zoom. Thank you so much, Ms. Doreen, for all the things you are doing. Thank you. And to our dear participants, we have the certificate of participation. Please be reminded that evaluation form has been posted in the chat box on Zoom and on YouTube. So fill in the form and you'll be getting the certificate of participation barely 2 weeks after this session. Our certificate has a unique certificate code, so we don't have two certificates bearing the same code. And you're going to get this awarded by the signatories here, Dr. Neil, Dr. Glenn, Ms. Patty, Mr. Jacob, Mr. Alfred, and myself. Thank you all for coming. All right, so before we go, you may want to turn on your camera. We take a photo and we'll be out of here in the next minutes. All right, so may I remind you, we are live on our YouTube channel. You can search for IELTS Ghana on YouTube, IELTS Ghana on Facebook, IELTS Ghana on LinkedIn, on Twitter, IELTS Ghana, on Telegram, IELTS Ghana, Instagram. We are there. So do well to follow us and get updated, notified of our upcoming events. We are going to have another session on April 1, 2023. Okay. So here we go. 1, 2, 3. Okay. All right. Thank you all for coming. It's been an awesome session with Prosper on this amazing topic. We will meet some other time. Thank you. Bye.